In the previous video, we looked at goals and principles to design usable interfaces. So usable interfaces refer to interfaces that are effective, efficient, learnable, memorable, and safe. And they also ensure that users have positive experiences while using these interfaces. So keeping these goals and principles in mind, we can now start building interfaces which implement the user stories and requirements. And also recall that the process of interaction design, it involves first identifying the needs and requirements. Then we develop alternative designs that meet those requirements. Then we build interactive versions of these designs. And finally, we evaluate the user interface. So now let's say we have identified the needs and requirements, and we know what the goals are which we need to keep in mind while building such systems. So now we can proceed to the second step of developing alternative designs and building interactive versions of the user interface. But how do we do this? Can we directly jump and write code? Do you think that is a good idea? So let's reflect on this question. Are we ready to code once we know the needs and the requirements? Can we code the UI right away? What are some reasons for not doing so? You can pause this video and think of some reasons before proceeding. Okay, so what are some reasons for why we shouldn't start coding right away? One is that the initial design ideas, it might not be the best ones. So users may not like certain aspects of the initial UI. Second, developing a user interface, writing code, it takes time, it takes money and effort. And if the users do not like the first version, then we have to go back and write code and redesign the entire user interface from scratch. So the solution for this is to develop prototypes. So prototypes allow you to quickly test on users, get some feedback, and iterate. So prototypes, it helps us answer questions and also support designers in choosing between different alternatives. So what are the purposes of prototyping? It helps us test out the technical feasibility of an idea. So some aspects of the user interface might not be very clear at the start. And also we might have some very vague requirements. So once we build a simple prototype and show it to users, then they might give us feedback and it will help us clarify these vague requirements as well. And prototyping is also useful for user testing and evaluating our initial prototypes or initial user interfaces. So prototypes help us to build something quickly and get feedback quickly. Cut. So now let us look at different types of prototypes. So we can develop different types of prototypes based on the purpose and the time of development, and also the fidelity. So fidelity refers to how real the interface is compared to the final product. So in this graph, you can see that storyboards and paper prototypes, they are developed initially and they do not resemble the final product that much. But as you move towards the right, top right, you see that digital mockups and interactive prototypes move closer to the final product which we want to build. So now let us look at what storyboards are. So storyboard is nothing but a hand-drawn comic that features three important elements. One is the setting, second, the sequence of activities in the task, and finally, it's the satisfaction which the user receives. So setting refers to the context in which the system, the software or the app will be used. For example, who all are the people involved? What is the environment? What is the task which needs to be accomplished? And the second aspect is the sequence. So what steps are involved and what is the task and how is it being illustrated? All that comes in the sequence. And finally, the satisfaction. So what motivates people to use the system? What sense of accomplishment do they get after using the system? And what need does the system fill? So this also has to be mentioned in the storyboard. So let's take an example of a storyboard. So we will be looking at an application known as SpeakUp. So SpeakUp is a virtual reality tool which can be used to give effective presentations. So let's say we want to give a presentation in front of a large audience. So before we give the actual presentation, we can use SpeakUp, which is a VR application that simulates a presentation setting for us. We can record our audio and hints are provided, and all of these features are present in this tool. So let's see how we can create a storyboard for such a tool. So now let's look at the storyboard for the SpeakUp VR application. So recall that the first step in storyboarding is to develop the setting, right? So who are the people involved? What is the environment? And what is the task which has to be accomplished? So here you can see that a person, he has to give a presentation on Monday and he is practicing in front of a mirror. But on the day of the presentation, he is nervous and he's not able to give the presentation well. Right? So we see who are the people involved, what is the environment, and what is the task. The task is to give an effective presentation. Now that the setting has been established, now the second step is the sequence, or what are the steps, or what is the task which the software system helps the user to do. So here you see that a friend recommends SpeakUp to this person and talks about what all are the features in SpeakUp. And here we see that the user starts using SpeakUp. So he can choose a type of audience and he can start recording his audio. We see that the system gives feedback, gives comments. The user can send the recording of his presentation to his mentor, and there is a second round of practice. So in all of these, we see that the steps which are involved are clearly defined. What is a task? All that has been clearly defined in the storyboard. And finally, we see that this person presents effectively in front of an audience. And this brings us to the third part of storyboarding, which is the satisfaction, right? What motivates people to use the system, or what is the sense of accomplishment that this person receives after using the system? So here we can see that this person becomes confident. He can effectively give a presentation in front of a large audience. Now that we have seen an example of a storyboard, let's look at what are its benefits. One is that a storyboard gives us a holistic focus, right? It emphasizes how the interface accomplishes the task without giving specific details about it. Also, it avoids commitment to a particular user interface. So in the case of the Speak Up storyboard, you might have noticed that no user interface or none of the features were actually developed. And finally, it helps develop a shared understanding among the different stakeholders. So this ensures that all the stakeholders are on the same page in terms of the goals of the software system which we want to build. So we looked at storyboards. Another type of prototypes is to use paper prototypes. So paper prototypes are simple. It is a hand-drawn user interface, and we usually use multiple pieces of paper to actually draw the UI of different screens. So let's look at an example. So this is an example of an online library system for the deaf and hard of hearing, or the DHH and speech impaired students. So it has several features such as, books are provided in Indian Sign Language. There are options for speech therapy, etc. So let's look at how we can develop a paper prototype for this application. So this is a prototype for an online library for DHH and speech impaired students. So as we mentioned in the paper prototype, the different screens of the UI, or all the elements of the UI, are drawn on a piece of paper. So here you can see that the first screen which a user encounters is the login screen. And when the user clicks on a particular link or button, what is the next screen which appears? That is being shown. So for example, a user can be a student, teacher, or a parent. So the appropriate user can click on the particular button, and then it proceeds to show the options for different screens. So if I click on a particular option, what is the next screen which appears that is being shown? And this process continues for all the screens in the application. So for example, here when I choose ISL, which stands for Indian Sign Language, then there is a drop down in which I can choose the language which I want to see it in. And for each option, what are the different screens which are visible to me, that is being shown. So let's look at some benefits of these paper prototypes. One is that it is much easier than writing code for the actual user interface, right? Developing these paper prototypes involve just drawing something on a piece of paper, drawing the different screens, and hence it's much easier than writing code. And with paper prototypes, you can start conversations about user interactions. As we saw, that it gives us a flow of how the screens will progress for different features. And this can be used to talk to the client and see if both the client and the developers are on the same page. And third, these elements can be changed immediately on the fly, right? If the client wants some features or some buttons or some navigation to be changed, these elements can be changed immediately based on the given feedback. So that was about paper prototypes. Another type of prototype is to use digital mockups using tools such as Photoshop, PowerPoint, etc. And these are more closer to the final product. So let's look at the same example of what we saw in the paper prototypes, and let's see how we can transform or translate this paper prototype into a digital mockup. So we saw how we can develop paper prototypes. And now once we have these paper prototypes, it is not very difficult to translate them into digital mockups. So you can use tools like PowerPoint, Photoshop, and another tool which can help you do this is known as Figma. So let's see how this the paper prototype has been translated into a digital mockup. So here you can see that you can explore the library. So there are buttons which are clickable, and I can click on any link, right? If I want to read some ebooks for a particular subject, right? And here I can see that these are the options which are available. You need not enable all the options, right? So in this way, a digital mockup can create or help you develop interactions for different screens in your application, and it moves you closer to the final product. And once you have this digital mockup ready, you can show it to clients, get feedback from them, and this will help you transition or move towards the final software product. So in this video, we looked at several prototyping techniques. And we saw that these prototyping techniques, they differ based on when it is used in the development process and its fidelity compared to the final product, or how real the product is compared to the final product. And we looked at several techniques. And the important thing to note is that these prototypes, they facilitate conversations about different things with the clients, among developers, designers, etc. So for example, the storyboard, it facilitates conversations about the user tasks or the goals of the software system which we want to build. Paper prototypes goes one step further, where we design the screens, the UI elements on paper, and this helps us facilitate conversations about the actual interactions in the system. Whereas in digital mockups and in interactive prototypes, you talk about the visual design or you talk about the finer details of the user interface. So in this way, these different type of prototyping techniques can help us refine our user interface and develop effective and usable interfaces.